He was under investigation, Matt Gaetz, for sexual misconduct and illicit drug use by the House Ethics Committee for roughly 3 years. But that investigation came to a halt once he was picked as Attorney General, and he immediately resigned from office. Gaetz has denied the allegations. The committee was supposed to meet last night and discuss if they would release the report, but the meeting was canceled, and Speaker Mike Johnson doesn't think there's a good reason to mess with precedents.
I believe it is very important to maintain the House's tradition of not issuing ethics reports on people who are no longer members of Congress. I think it would open a Pandora's box. I think it's a very important rule that should be maintained. If it's been broken once or twice, it should not have been, because that would be a Pandora's box. I think it's a very important tradition to maintain.
Did you talk to Trump about this?
In this new world order, acquiescence is key and defiance is punishable. Just listen to this threat.
If you want to get in the way, fine. But we're going to try to get you out of the Senate, too, if you try to do that.
And with Republicans on the cusp of controlling the White House, the House of Representatives, and the U.S. Senate, and firmly in control of the Supreme Court, thanks to Leonard Leo, do not look for the cavalry to arrive, because there is no cavalry. What you will get instead is blind allegiance. You know, sort of like this.
I always believe that you defer to a president when it comes to the people they want in their cabinet.
My own presumption with all of his nominees is that the president's entitled to choose his cabinet, and I presume I'll support them.
Well, I voted for a lot of people I didn't like.
That last man, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, well, he's the guy who famously warned Republicans that if the party nominated Donald Trump, that it would get destroyed and deserve it. Almost 10 years later, Graham sold his soul to MAGA and has done the same thing to American democracy. Joining me now is MSNBC political analyst Ben Rhodes, who served as Deputy National Security Advisor in the Obama White House, and Tara Setmeyer, former Republican Communications Director and founder of the Seneca Project. Thank you both for being here. Ben, I want to go back to Tulsi Gabbard. From your perspective, how do you process the idea that she could soon lead our intelligence agencies?
Yeah, it's an alarming choice, to say the least, Joy. I mean, there are different ways that you could think about it. First of all, it's interesting to me that Trump has reserved some of his most ludicrous picks for kind of intelligence and law enforcement. That's clearly an area where he wants to kind of drive people out of the bureaucracy. I think he wants mass resignations. You know, I think he wants to essentially empty out these agencies and kind of restock them with a cabinet of MAGA, approved people. That's the first point. The second point is that the DNI, people should be aware, is the principal advisor to the President on Intelligence. What that means, Joy, I was in the PDB with the Presidential Daily Briefing with President Obama for years. Every morning, that's the DNI who oversees that product. So the information that receives the President of the United States about the most important issues is filtered through this person. We know Tulsi Gabbard has bizarre views that are kind of wildly out of step with American national security interests. You talked about the consistently pro-Russian talking points. That's only the beginning of it. You talked about kind of siding with Bashar al-Assad when he was slaughtering his own people. So just imagine how she might filter. I mean, just look at her social media accounts. It'll tell you the filter through which she's going to be putting that information that informs the President of the United States and then informs kind of the rest of the government. So that's alarming. And then the last piece I look at is how is she going to interact with the other people that fill out the intelligence community. We have a CIA nominee who is someone who had to withdraw his name from consideration in the past Trump administration, definitely a loyalist. The CIA controls vast amounts of kind of covert operations in addition to intelligence gathering. There are rumors of him firing Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, and putting in a loyalist like a Kash Patel who, makes some of these other people look good in terms of their credentials. And so he may be trying to kind of transform the entire intelligence community into this kind of extension of MAGA. And that, given how much happens in the shadows that, that the American people won't see in the intelligence community, that should be very worrying to people.
It should be. I mean, and Tara, all the conspiracy theorists are here to play between RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, who also, I mean, I was reading a piece that said that her, and everyone can have their own religion. You can have whatever religion you want, but she's a member of a sect that some deem perhaps a cult, and, she's a member of it, and people have said it's a bit strange, and it would have made it difficult for her to get a national security clearance. But now she'll be in charge of national security. And it's hard to imagine our allies being excited about sharing intel with us if these people are in place, let alone the person who's at DOD. So there is some reporting that NBC has that there are some rumblings against at least the Matt Gaetz nomination on Capitol Hill, and people claiming, always without attribution, quietly, very quietly, that they may not want to confirm him. Do you believe that there are enough spines left among Republicans to maybe even share together to stop any of these nominees?
No. Why would we believe that? If, you know,
Right.
all the reporting that's coming out that these senators are aghast at the Matt Gaetz nominations and the trifecta with Gabbard and Gaetz and Hegseth and now RFK Jr. We don't care what you're aghast about. They were aghast after January 6th and didn't do a damn thing about it. So why would they do it now? I mean, it is so frustrating for those of us who have been sounding the alarm for years that this is exactly what Donald Trump would do, that now all of a sudden everyone's pearl clutching. This is who Donald Trump wants. This is who Donald Trump is. This is the type of chaos that even Nikki Haley warned Republicans about. And here we are. I mean, the idea, and it's still sinking in, right? 10 days later, here we are, that this is actually happening, because it was all notional before, but now it's real. And the American people have effed around and are about to find out what happens when you empower someone as unfit as Donald Trump and the cacophony of kooks, cronies, and crackpots that he brings with him, that's going to undermine our democratic institutions and reform our government in a way that we have never seen. You know, Ben brought up Kash Patel. That's the next one now that's being floated for FBI director, because Trump wants to get rid of Christopher Wray because he wants another loyalist. Kash Patel should scare the hell out of everyone also in a position like the FBI. This is a guy who is aggrieved because he used to work at the DOJ, and then he had some incidents there where he felt that he wasn't defended. And so he's had it out now for the FBI, for the DOJ, for the deep state. And he pals around with the ilk of Steve Bannon and Benny Johnson and the severe right wing. This is a guy that is a bootlicker for Donald Trump. He is a sycophant to the point where he's trying to emulate Trump. He hawks all kinds of merchandise online. He's written books that are a bunch of BS. He subscribes to conspiracy theories. He produced the January 6th anthem. Okay, so this is a guy that you want to put in charge of the FBI. He's someone that wants to prosecute journalists and go after the media. He would be Donald Trump's enforcer. So these are the types of things that we have to now face as reality. And the Republicans who have the ability to stop all of this, I'm not holding my breath, but it's up to them. It's unfortunately up to them. And they've done nothing but let us down because they're craven cowards. And that's how we got here in the first place, frankly.
Yeah, I don't expect any of them to be stopped. And Ben, I want to talk about just how our allies, I mean, we're talking about Pete Hegseth. This is the pick for defense secretary. These sexual assault allegations, which of course his lawyer has denied, so the police statement speaks for itself. He was cleared, saying there's not much more I can say. It didn't happen. The Trump transition team, they're vigorously denying all the accusations. There were no charges filed. They're saying we look forward to his confirmation, et cetera. That's Stephen Chung, the person who is the spokesperson for Donald Trump. Monterey Police Department has issued a press release saying the full police report, including its analysis and the conclusions reflected therein, are exempt from public disclosure. So we're not going to get a lot of details about it. But if you're someone overseas looking at somebody coming into the Pentagon who may be cashiering generals who are senior to him in every way in the military, looking at the potential for them to be trying to get retribution on our, four-star generals and high-ranking officials in the military, prosecuting journalists, et cetera. Is there any reason, number one, why foreign intelligence services would keep sharing information with us? And is there any way for the Biden administration to get out of some of these deals with intelligence sharing before Trump and the comment section take over?
Yeah, I don't know that the Biden administration would do that. I mean, they're clearly very much playing it by the book in terms of this transition.
Why?
I think it is pretty well. That's their modus operandi. As we've seen over the last few years, and it was on display in the Oval Office. I just think that's the one gear that Joe Biden knows. and we're in different times, you know. And I think allies can make their own decisions, though, and I do think that they'll be evaluating this as it unfolds, and on things like information sharing and other forms of cooperation, and whether to look to the United States as like the principal defense partner. Or there are a lot of countries that are kind of on the fence. You know, we've been trying to build military relations with India. We've been trying to kind of expand networks of alliances in Europe and Asia. You know who's a serious person, and when it comes to like understanding military matters, I'm not saying I agree with these people, but the Chinese Minister of Defense is not a Fox and Friends host on the weekends. The Russian Minister of Defense, you know, these are people who've been working in military affairs for decades. You know, they must be looking at this guy and just thinking, what a gift, you know, to us.
Yeah.
And if you're in Europe, if you're an American ally, you're hedging. I mean, I see stories, Joy, about, oh, the allies are preparing to charm Trump and all this stuff. That may be the outward-facing approach that they're taking diplomatically, but what they're doing is they're furiously hedging. Europe is developing its own defense industrial base to be kind of its own supplier for defense, and Ukraine's supplier for defense. Emmanuel Macron is talking about, you know, Europe needing to have not only its own kind of more consolidated defense capability, but the need to kind of look around for other partners around the world. You know, the Chinese will be trying to take advantage of that. Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, who's been a stalwart supporter of Ukraine, had his first phone call with Vladimir Putin in 2 years in the last couple of days. So you see what's happening around the world. They don't have the time to waste to sit around and see if this country gets its act together. They see what's happening. They don't need to normalize it. They need to adjust to it. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of countries moving in different directions over the next 4 years, because, you know, the first time they said, is Trump an aberration? This time they see, you know, maybe this is where America's going, and they may be going in a different direction, I think.